So you've got your mock this week. So all I wanted to do is just try and do a quite quick fire little video just to make sure that you've got a couple of bits that you can definitely use in the mock, just a kind of final push towards in terms of revision, just so I don't feel like I'm just kind of leaving you to it. I want to feel that I'm kind of pushing you in terms of this. Okay. So all I've got for you today, 8 kind of little quickfire extracts from In Hamlet, and then 2 brief bits of criticism, and then the same for Gatsby. So 8 kind of little bits from In Gatsby and 2 little bits of criticism. Just so that if you are kind of approaching that second Hamlet question, you've got a nice little range of little bits of quotation you can bring in, a couple of extra bits of criticism. Same with Gatsby. When you're approaching that question, you've got some nice little bits that hopefully you remember, fresh in your mind, and a couple of bits of criticism to go in as well. Okay, so what I want you to do, I'll put up the little bit from the text, stop it for a minute, think about what you could say about it, find it in your books, and then I'll quickly go through it, and hopefully that will help towards the exam. So that's our first one. Have a quick look at it, find it, think why it's significant, and then I'll go through it. Okay, so significance of this one, it's Hamlet's very first words in his very first soliloquy. So it's that first view into the mind of him as a character that Shakespeare gives us. You get the kind of desire expressed here for a kind of self-annihilation, essentially, that he seeks a non-existence. So there is a clear sense of distress within the character. There's a clear sense of kind of melancholy and pain coming through this. And this kind of romanticism that he gives to a kind of potential suicide. So this very first view into Hamlet's mind is both something stable within him. There's a kind of reasoned and kind of thoughtful response here within the soliloquy, but it's also something that shows a pain and a distress and an instability at the same time. Then our next one out of 8, classic one, find it, think about why it's important, and then we'll have a look at it. Okay, so this is the one, it kind of gets gone over again and again and again, but I think it's a very important one. This is Hamlet talking to Horatio and expressing that he is going to make a kind of conscious choice to put on his antic disposition, that this is a decision made, and anything that follows then in terms of the insanity that we see from Hamlet becomes kind of questionable. Then we have this one. So this is, well, you find it, think about why it's important, then we go through it. Okay, so again with this one, it's all about kind of calling Hamlet's madness, his instability into question. He's using the analogy of the winds in order to kind of express his kind of view of his madness. And he is mad north-northwest, so he's mad rarely. In fact, you don't get this kind of wind coming in regularly. You get far more likely you're going to have a southerly wind, and when the wind is southerly, I know a hawk from a handsaw. So his expression here does suggest that the greater part of himself is sane. Having said that, it does suggest that there are genuine moments of madness. On occasion, the wind will strike north-northwest. And so it blurs the lines between what's is real in Hamlet's madness and what is not. Then we've got this one, try to think who says it. This one's not Hamlet. Find it. Okay, so this is Ophelia describing Hamlet. And it's important on two levels. You've got to think not just about the words on the page, because then you might slightly lose some of the meaning here. This is delivered by a very distressed Ophelia. This is in the nunnery scene after he's kind of berated her, potentially kind of thrown her to the ground, and told her to go to a nunnery, implying a kind of sexual infidelity that goes with her. So it's exclamatory, it shows a distress and a pain on the part of Ophelia, something that's potentially going to break her later on, or be part of what breaks her. It also reflects on Hamlet here. The metaphor implies that she does think that Hamlet is mad. Oh, what a noble mind is here overthrown. So Hamlet's noble mind has been overturned and he's lost the nobility that he once had. So then we have, yeah, I've cut this down slightly. Find it from later on. You should be looking in the closet scene. Okay, so this is Hamlet kind of berating his mother in the kind of closet scene. Now, this one's important. He's kind of comparing old Hamlet to Claudius, and he's berating his mother for that kind of indiscreet marriage, the quick marriage, and kind of suggesting that there's something. I'm trying to think how to kind of describe this. Not something kind of insane within it, but something kind of inconsistent, something kind of warped in the logic that goes with this. So such an act refers to her kind of marriage to Claudius, and it takes off the rose from the fair forehead of an innocent love. So it's corrupted the love that she once had with old Hamlet, and instead it sets something unpleasant and corrupt and painful there. It sets a blister there. So Gertrude's actions here in the marriage of Claudius might be described as kind of disturbed, as not mad in the same way as Hamlet's madness, but they too are a kind of act of an odd act, essentially. Then what chosen next? Here we are. So you're looking into Act 4 for this. Find it within Act 4. Think about who delivers it and what the implication is. Okay, so again, not Hamlet this time. This is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern addressing Hamlet. What have you done, my lord, with the dead body? So they continue to have to show a level of respect to Hamlet. He's still my lord within this. But remember, this all comes as part of this kind of twisted and warped scene where Hamlet is hiding the body of Polonius. And there is something of a kind of blurring here between Hamlet's feigned madness and a kind of more real madness. The kind of hiding of the body is something twisted and kind of perverse, essentially. Especially given that this is the father of, Ophelia, whom he supposedly loved at least at one stage. So the very kind of implications of him hiding the body and not allowing them to take it for decent burial reflects onto Hamlet's state of mind. Then we've got this one again. Should remember this one, find it, think why it's important. Okay, so for this one, Ophelia. Now, remember, we can draw kind of various parallels between Ophelia and between Hamlet. And when we're looking at the flower scene, yes, there's a kind of madness, and she's going to appear on stage dishevelled, in a kind of clear state of distress that suggests something more genuine around her madness than Hamlet. But like Hamlet, there's a kind of method behind her madness in the kind of symbolism that goes with each of the flowers potentially given to the various people. The flowers kind of symbolizing, the loss, the flattery, the kind of forsaken love, and things like this. So the implication here is that there is a level of kind of thought that underlies it. Then the last one of our quick fire quotations. Think about this one. You should be finding it in the very last scene. Okay, so remember with this one, it's essentially kind of Hamlet at the very end here in that final confrontation with Laertes, and his madness becomes a kind of shield for him essentially. Anything that he's done whilst he's been in a kind of maddened state cannot really be given to him in terms of responsibility. So we get the kind of implication here: if Hamlet from himself be taken away, and when he's not himself does wrong Laertes, then Hamlet does not. Does it not? Hamlet denies it. But who does it then? His madness. Well, his madness is something outside of himself, something more genuine that shields him from the kind of moral blame for the death of kind of Polonius here. So it's a kind of important one. It kind of implies that at least again at some points his madness has been genuine, and the purpose of this madness from kind of Shakespeare's point of view is to kind of distance him from the acts that he's committed. So just a couple of pieces of criticism, and I've just taken a couple of bits from A.C. Bradley. So quickly have a look, have a read of this one, think about why it's important. Okay, so here we've simply got a critical point of view that notes that Shakespeare, when he has Hamlet alone, when he has Hamlet with Horatio, does not give him the signs of madness, and essentially this implies the kind of feigned nature of the madness, that it's only when he's in public that this madness is shown. And then we have another one from A.C. Bradley that you might use and kind of quote here. So these you've probably not seen before, so you might want to write them down as well. Here's the second one. He's talking about Gertrude. Have a read of it. Think about why it's important. Okay, I think it's an interesting one because it allows you to kind of debate around Gertrude a fair bit. Basically, he kind of implies that Gertrude is not complicit within the plot, or at least he doesn't view her, or as Shakespeare's intentions as creating that impression of her. And all of her actions are simply directed by the fact that she is dull and shallow, and she's like a sheep in the sun, which I think is a nice simile. And it's a good one because various different versions of Gertrude have been done totally differently to this one. She has been portrayed in a far more kind of as a character with far more depth in various different performances than this. So it allows you to kind of debate around her actions and what kind of leads to them. So we move on to kind of Gatsby ones. These tend to be sort of slightly longer, so try and find them quickly and think about why they're significant. So there is my first one. Think about why it's significant. Okay, so I've chosen this one because it's, again, you're thinking about debating within the Hamlet question and you're thinking about linking it to context. So with this one, it shows that Gatsby is both something of kind of interest. He's a kind of heroic figure in many ways. There's something gorgeous about him. He's got a heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, but it is all about outward show, personality being a series of kind of gestures. That it's kind of it does hint at something kind of maybe more superficial around Gatsby. Then we get this one. Think about who it's about, what you can say about it. Okay, so with this one, the characters in Gatsby very often kind of considered as kind of symbols as much as they are kind of representative of an individual. So they're simply kind of symbolic of wider social groups. And here, Tom, his physicality, his kind of physical description can be viewed as representative and symbolic of his kind of wider social power as well. The fact that his physical body is capable of enormous leverage, a cruel body represents the social power he has. Both of them are kind of powerful. His money gives him power, and he's able to kind of move things. It gives him leverage over kind of other things. Then we have, bit from the Valley of Ashes. So find this, think about why it's important, what you can say about it. Okay, so within this one, I think the farm bit is often kind of gone over essentially a little bit. Remember, you're kind of linking in your study of American literature, you're seeing how American literature has changed over time. And essentially, early American literature is about, that you get the Homestead Act, you get each man being able to produce enough for himself, you get a lot of focus on that kind of farming lifestyle, the success of that. And in the more modern American literature, you get the kind of failure of this kind of original American dream. So here it's the Valley of Ashes, and you get the description of it as a fantastic farm. But unlike the farms of old America, all that grows here are ashes, ashes that grow like wheat. And the men here are diminished by this. There's a kind of destruction of them. They're being destroyed. They move already crumbling through the powdery air. So there's this implication about what modern America is doing to people, about how it's changed from kind of eras before. So again, it's allowing you to discuss your context quite effectively and fit it in to that kind of wider tradition that we're getting. Then we get this one. It's about Myrtle. You should find this one in chapter 2 again. Grab it quickly. Okay, so within this one, it's one of my favourite ones to kind of pick out because it allows you to do several things that keep you kind of writing analytical while still linking into the context. So it allows you to talk about Nick as a kind of narrative voice and the way that he kind of satirizes, he mocks Myrtle kind of internally for her desire to move upwards. And you get this kind of depiction of Myrtle as this kind of working class attempt to move up and the kind of unsuccessful nature of it. So rather than the beautiful gestures of Gatsby, you get them being kind of more violently affected, that there's something kind of jerky around this. And she seems to be revolving on a creaky pivot. So she's still associated with the kind of industrialization of the Valley of Ashes where she comes from. So she can't escape it. Then we get this one coming from the end of chapter 3. Find it quickly and think about it in relation to the start of chapter 3, although I'm only kind of picking out the end bit. Okay, so if we place this one within the context of the wider chapter and the fact that initially within the chapter, Gatsby's parties appear very kind of ostentatious, very beautiful, and something kind of, exciting. You get the kind of revelation that Fitzgerald keeps creating, that these initial impressions of this kind of golden age and something beautiful can be stripped away, and underneath it we get the kind of the cars, those technological symbols of the new age kind of cutting into it. So you get the caterwauling of horns and the kind of sounds of the kind of industry. And you get the kind of isolation of Gatsby himself that's kind of sold up here. So for all of his images of outer success, he's kind of presented as kind of essentially alone and isolated through the kind of this flow of kind of isolation that exits out. The next one to kind of pick out here comes from later on. This is a couple of chapters later on. We're into kind of chapter 5 here that I picked out. Find this one towards the end of the chapter. Okay, so given the context that this comes from the reunion between Gatsby and Daisy, you want to kind of see the symbolism here, and the fact that even whilst they're kind of reunited, There's something that kind of reminds us of the distance between them, representative of the distance between those two different social classes. So there's the mist that separates them, there's the bay that separates the two eggs, and you get that reference into the kind of green light that always burns there and the kind of symbolism that potentially goes with that. Green for envy, green for the dollar, green for new life, all that it could represent as part of it. Last couple for Gatsby. So I've kind of chosen this one next. Find this one quickly. It's from the end of chapter 6 this time. And then I've got one more after it, and then a couple of bits of criticism. Okay, so I like this one because it gives a kind of sense of kind of beautiful romanticism that surrounds Gatsby and Daisy's relationship, but also a kind of futility that goes with it as well. For Gatsby to pursue Daisy and all she represents is going to be a kind of anticlimax. That what she represents is something kind of fragile, something kind of inconsistent. Her breath is perishable. And ultimately, it's this kind of pursuit of Daisy and what she represents that leads to kind of Gatsby's destruction and the destruction of his dreams. He will never romp again like the mind of God. But he still chooses to follow her. He kissed her, and the kind of this incarnation blossoms between them. Then again, nice one that everybody remembers. Hopefully you remember it. Hopefully you're potentially able to use it. It's one of those ones that a lot of people use. It's quite a flexible one. So this is from the very end of the novel, last couple of pages. Find this one quickly. Just think about what it means, what kind of implications go with it. Okay, so with this one, it's about kind of depicting Tom and Daisy. And depicting them as kind of careless people, and it's more than just Tom and Daisy. It's them as a kind of social class. It shows how wealth and privilege can kind of shield people from the kind of destruction that they cause. And the implication is this is something that's kind of consistent. It's never changing. This is something that's always been there and always will be there. So they smash things up, and then they're able to retreat back into their money or their basket, whatever it was that kept them together. So everything, it's not just wealth, it's the other social aspects to it as well. And they let other people clean up the mess they had made. So I've then got a couple of bits of brief criticism that you might jot down, you might potentially be able to use. So they're both by Froelich. And the first one is them pointing out that in many ways Gatsby's storyline follows, at least to an extent, a kind of popular series at the time, the Alger stories, which kind of follow a pattern in which a young boy gains success, but gains success in a kind of cliched way. And this is what they kind of suggest here. So have a think about it, think how you could link it into Gatsby. Okay, so the first thing that you could do here is draw the parallel into Gatsby. Gatsby has a number of kind of powerful mentoring figures. He has Dan Cody and he has Wolfsheim. And what the kind of critic is doing is showing how these kind of relationships undercut the American dream, that wealth is not achieved through virtue and hard work. It's to do with kind of those social relationships and to a degree luck. So it allows you to discuss how Gatsby himself does achieve wealth, but not through kind of legitimate means, and it's kind of undercut by the kind of relationships he has. And then last little bit, just to kind of finish it off, basically I'll paraphrase this. I'm not even going to quote it directly. But you can think whether you kind of agree or disagree and what the kind of significance of this parallel that the critic is kind of pointing out here is between the dog collar and the chain of pearls bought for Daisy. Okay, now I think this one's an interesting one because it both suggests how women are confined by a kind of masculine power, both Myrtle and Daisy. It also draws out something around the differing social classes. So for Myrtle, that kind of it's the same implication, the same symbolism that goes with the item, but there's not the same kind of value given to it. Myrtle is of the lower social class. She's not as kind of valued by Tom. It's simply a dog collar. Whereas you get the chain of pearls bought for Daisy, which, yes, do hold a higher kind of intrinsic value, but still suggest that same kind of constriction placed onto women. So again, it's a nice little bit of criticism that you can kind of work in there. Hopefully that's useful for people. It's just a little thing to help you with the revision, to go out with kind of final instructions in a bit. Okay. Good luck in it.